Origen didn't write anything till he was in middle life. He was apparently a wonderful talker. He taught all day and he preached a lot, expounding the scriptures. Someone whom he had helped to faith paid for 6 secretaries to write it all down. The first Christian publisher. And in the next century, Jerome is saying, who can read all he wrote? But you see what I mean. Here is a whole huge literature appearing as Christians convert a literary civilization. It's part of the conversion of the Greek world. Well, what I'd like to think of today is what happens when you cross the next cultural frontier into the barbarian world, where there's no books and no writing. Where your literary style won't count at all, where there's no philosophical tradition, where there's no Platonic or Stoic tradition to try and bring into relation with the scriptures. And let's cross that frontier today into the barbarian world. Just to remind you, we saw yesterday this Hellenistic civilization centered on the Roman Empire, an empire which in New Testament times is beginning to reach its greatest extent. An empire based on the Mediterranean, which includes the North African coast. Romans never got very far into North Africa. They stop at the mountains. And then into Egypt, and they stop more or less along the boundaries of present-day Egypt, that sort of area. The Middle East, not Iran, that's the enemy, that's the other superpower. And then a shifting line across northern Europe up to the Atlantic, so that for a brief time, England, Britain is part of it. The Romans never bothered with Scotland. They decided it wasn't worth the effort, so they built a wall to keep the Scots out. They never bothered with Ireland either. So this part of Europe was never touched by Rome. Southern Europe deeply affected by it. And you might say that the two things belong together. Roman Empire and Hellenistic civilization, Greco-Roman world, are roughly the same. And you've got this quite rapid expansion of Christian faith that goes on within this civilized world. From point of view of Roman foreign policy, you've got two things to worry about. First is Eastern frontier, that other superpower, Persia. Every now and again war breaks out. And there's a bit of a shifting frontier in the east too, with these Arab states here. But the more present worry is how to hold this enormous frontier. You can see the huge area across Europe which you've got to hold. And there's no natural frontier. You can't use rivers or anything like that. You've got beyond the frontiers these pre-literate peoples who belong to many ethnic groups. They are subsistence farmers, or they are semi-settled raiders who live by raiding. They're hungry for land, very often because they are being pushed by other peoples. There seems to have been, within this period, a huge movement of peoples out of Central Asia. So people in Northern and Western Europe are under pressure from other peoples who are coming in, and so they are pressing down on the Roman frontiers all the time. And so your second arm of your foreign policy is to defend those frontiers the best way you can. And you're always afraid that the frontiers will collapse. And in fact, the history of the Roman Empire from this time on is of withdrawal. Yes, you give up England. It's not called England yet, it's Britain. But you give up. You gradually pull your armies back closer and closer to the frontier. Or you make a deal with one group of barbarians, we'll let you in if you keep the others out. But you can see that there's a constant fear that civilization will be overwhelmed by these land-hungry people who are different from us, who are who speak barbar languages, who don't share in our civilization, and who want our land. Christians in the Roman Empire shared in that general fear of the barbarians. Tertullian, who of course lived in North Africa, in what's now Tunisia, Tertullian has a telling passage. He's making the case that Christians are not, this is still in the days of the pagan empire, that Christians are not disloyal. Christians are under attack politically because they will not carry out that state sacrifice to the emperor's statue, the emperor's genius, the emperor's spirit. As we saw yesterday, Jews were exempt from that, but Christians weren't. Well, people who refuse to acknowledge the emperor must be disloyal. Furthermore, they didn't join the army. They refused to take the military oath. Must be disloyal. No, says Tertullian. We are loyal to the emperor. We pay our taxes. We pray for the emperor. We pray for the empire. We pray for the defense of the frontiers. We pray, and this is the end of his sentence, pro mora finis. We pray for the delay of the end. See what he's thinking about? The delay of the end. The Great Tribulation that Christians pray to be delivered from. And what will the Great Tribulation be? It's when the barbarians come pouring over the frontiers and destroy civilization. And that's how a late 2nd, early 3rd century Christian sees the barbarian peoples. Move on a century and a half and you've got Augustine looking at a very real threat, because in Augustine's time the barbarian peoples are coming out of Spain towards North Africa. And indeed, when Augustine dies, one barbarian group, the Vandals, who've given the English language a word of their own, what vandalism is, that's the reputation they had. The Vandals are at the gate of his city. And with that invasion imminent, he writes his great book, The City of God, with the difference between the earthly city and the city that abides forever. Romans, Christians as well as pagans, lived under the fear of this collapse of civilization. Well, I've mentioned the gradual encroachment of the barbarian peoples of the north and west, the erosion of the frontiers. It takes a long time. Several times they burst through. Rome itself gets looted. And Constantine, the first Christian emperor, decides the real heart of the empire is going to be in the east anyway, and moves the capital from Rome, which is always going to be subject to barbarian threat, to a new Rome over here, Constantinople, what is now Istanbul. And once he does that, you can see how power has changed. The real center of gravity of the Roman Empire is Greek, not Latin. And it's based on the eastern half of the Mediterranean, not the western half. In effect, the death warrant of the Western Roman Empire has been signed. But one thing that's beginning to happen, both east and west, is crossings of that frontier by the gospel. And one of the earliest, it's hard to know when the crossing actually starts, but we meet the effects of it in the 4th century. Here is firm Roman territory in what's now Turkey, in Asia Minor. Here is barbarian territory on the other side of the Black Sea.